Beyond 12 steps and talking treatments, there's considerable interest in medication that can treat both classic forms of addiction and overeating. Two versions of the same drug, naloxone and naltrexone, are used successfully to treat drug addiction by blocking their rewarding effects. Trials have just started in Finland to see if this drug can also help those who compulsively overeat, and early signs are encouraging. But of course the problem with drugs that block reward is that they block all rewards, and that can be a pretty miserable way to live, says Caitlin O'Hara.
It's a very tricky business, because if you're blocking dopamine, then not only are you blocking maybe an over-reward in response to food, but you're blocking your response to all other of life's rewards. So in a sense, how are you supposed to find something that becomes more rewarding than food?
But a really exciting thing about developing drug treatments is that it could work both ways. Attempts to find solutions for obesity might in fact be able to help to treat drug addiction, and just might do something for the stigma associated with it. Nora Volkov.
Well, indeed, in the National Institute on Drug Abuse, actually, we're currently testing them in clinical trials for the treatment of cocaine addiction. That's an example. It gives us a way into access of medications that are currently not being developed by pharmaceuticals for addiction, because addiction is quite stigmatized. So there's very little incentive for pharmaceuticals to work on medications for addiction, whereas there's a major incentive to work for medications that can be beneficial for obesity and all of the medical complications associated with it.
There may yet be more radical solutions too. In alcohol treatment, a drug called Antabuse is sometimes implanted into patients. It prevents people from drinking by reacting with alcohol to make them violently sick. And there's kind of an equivalent for obesity too, bariatric surgery, which restricts the amount someone can eat by, for example, fitting a gastric band to reduce the capacity of the stomach. It's fast, and research shows that it works in the majority of cases. At the moment, this treatment is prescribed mainly on the basis of a person's size, the dreaded body mass index, or BMI, and not on whether they have an eating disorder. At King's College Hospital, bariatric surgeon Mr. Amit Patel describes how successful surgery can help those who are obese, and he says more people could benefit.
BMI is a really bad criteria for using as a gauge for surgery. You'd think there's a large obesity problem, there is, and actually only the tip of that iceberg actually comes to see us, because by the time you actually decide that you need a surgical intervention, you've actually been through the diet, you've usually tried Weight Watchers, or you've tried one of the diets, or you've been to a gym and you've joined the fitness program, etc. You've done most of these things. If you ask any of our patients, they'll list you 5 diets they've tried.
And I'm presuming, correct me if I'm wrong, that while they're going through that process, they've put on even more weight. So
it's not unusual for people to say to me in clinic, I went on this diet, I lost 5 stone, then I put it back on and a bit more. If you say to the patients, do you ever feel full? Actually, a majority will say, I would say over 80% will say to you, I don't know what it's like to be full. And that's not unusual. And when we do some of the surgical procedures, that reverses that.
Should there be some way that surgical intervention could be used earlier for those people? If you could find a way of clearly diagnosing that they have a binge eating disorder, this is a treatment which can be used, which might help to reset that relationship between the gut and the brain. Do you think there's an argument for using this surgery on people who are even have less BMI than 35?
I think there are a lot of indications for doing patients that have BMI less than 35. I mean, everybody believes it, but not everybody will do it.
For about a third of Amit Patel's patients, it seems that there's a resetting in their preferences for unhealthy food, restoring the relationship between the stomach and the brain to one which is less harmful. Of course, all surgery comes with serious risks, and not all patients benefit from it. But perhaps as a society we need to stop being so queasy about bariatric surgery. Offer it to binge eaters as well as those who've grown morbidly obese. What's interesting to me about these different treatments for overeating is that in the addictions community there is a big debate between aiming for abstinence or reducing harm. For example, by using methadone as a substitute for heroin, or by giving a heavy drinker a weaker strength lager. In the case of food, though, abstinence from eating isn't possible, although abstinence from overeating is. Is this abstinence, in effect, harm reduction? And perhaps the most powerful tool we have to reduce harm is regulation, particularly if food addiction becomes a medical reality. But at the moment, that seems some way off. In the meantime, what do our experts think of the idea of food addiction?
As I see it, there are addiction-like elements in bulimia nervosa and binge eating disorder. To say that they are simply a food addiction, I think, is simplistic.
I think that there is dimensionality of addiction in obesity, absolutely. I think that most people that are obese, that are over-consuming food, have a certain level of loss of control, and that in some instances the loss of control may be as severe as that as you may observe in individuals that are addicted.
I think we have to be careful when we use the term addiction to describe uncontrolled overeating. It seems to me that it's a very attractive concept, a very attractive way of explaining our behaviour, but it's not strongly supported by the current evidence base.
Making this programme has been fascinating, but frustrating. There aren't clear answers yet. There's quite a lot of fence-sitting, but then that's scientists for you, and I say that as a scientist. One thing's for sure, though. The media's casual use of food addiction is at best misleading and at worst downright dangerous. They don't represent the evidence, but nor do they adequately describe the experiences of people like Michael and Louise.
There has to be an element of self-love, I think, in order to take that first step, in order to decide that I'm going to recover from this and believe that I can.
I mean, all I can tell you is that today, I haven't picked up the food and, I didn't yesterday, and that's as good as it gets.
Constant Cravings, Does Food Addiction Exist? Was presented by Sally Marlowe. The producer was Rami Zabah. And for details of organizations which offer advice and support about some of the issues in this program, you can go online to bbc.co.uk/actionline, or you can call the Radio 4 Action Line to hear recorded information on 0800 044 044. That number